In this video, I want to go through the group and ungroup features. There are many times when you apply a luminosity mask that you don't want it to be used all over the image. For example, let's say we wanted to adjust just this foreground down below. And if we were to use a dark midtone mask, that's a nice way to select this area. We could do a contrast adjustment through a curve. And with that, get a nice enhancement. I'm going to put this to a luminosity blending mode so that it has a nice enhancement of this detail down below. In fact, I might even want to push this up a little bit more. And I kind of like how that looks now. So it just gives it a little bit more contrast. But unfortunately, because this mask allows it to apply all over the image, including the sky and other areas, what you'll see is that the image is being impacted in the trees and the sky and other areas we just don't want to be impacted. So what we can do is restrict this mask with an additional mask. And the way we do that is by hitting the group tool here, and we'd have a mask applied to a mask. So we could simply invert this mask if we want to, use a brush, and then just go and paint in these areas here where we want to have an impact. And we'll see now that when I do this, it's only impacting this foreground. So basically this curve is being applied just to the selected areas here, and then this whole effect is being applied just in these areas here. Now if we use the ungroup feature, this is going to collapse the masks, and this is a nice way of seeing this. So we had this mask all over, but when we collapse the group by selecting the group and hitting ungroup, we'll see that we have the luminosity mask restricted just to this area. And that really is the feature, or the function of the ungroup is to take this mask and apply it to masks within it. So also, if we look down at the file size here, we're at about, what is this, 286 meg with the two, and it was 215 when we combined them. So you save a significant amount of space by collapsing these groups. And the reason we save so much in this case is there's a lot of detail here, and Photoshop can't really compress all that detail. It needs to retain all that information from the mask, whereas afterwards it just needs to compress this area down here. So you can really save a lot of space if you don't need to have both. So I use this ungroup feature quite a bit. Really can save a lot of space. It also reduces the clutter of having the additional rows here, and I just kind of like how the finished result here is very clear. Sorry, alt-clicking the mask to show it. The finished result is just very clear in terms of what is being impacted, versus when I'm looking at two masks, I really have to think about both of them at the same time. Now there are of course times when I want to keep both. If I wanted to refine this further because I don't like this selection, perhaps it's a little too crude, I could make further changes and expand the reach of that midtone mask. So whether you're going to collapse these or not is really just a question of whether or not you're done adjusting the mask. But once you've collapsed them, you can continue making adjustments to the opacity or the shape of the curve or whatever you want to do to this layer. So has a good bit of flexibility. A couple things to note. Let's say we throw up multiple layers here. I'm just going to kind of randomly put a few things up. Obviously this is kind of nonsense, but just to illustrate a point, whatever is selected when we click on the group will be grouped. So all of these components are now part of this group, and we could go through and make changes to each of them, whatever we want to do here. And we can now ungroup this if we want to. However, this is not a very interesting mask, so let's do something more interesting. So if I use a gradient here across the image, we've now created something that goes from fully visible to not. So it's basically taking these adjustments and applying them to the left side of the image. We can see the sky here is brighter, it's more colorful, versus the left-hand side. And if we just temporarily disable by shift-clicking, we can see without a mask, everything's covered here, and when we mask it, we're protecting this area here from all of these adjustments. So if we ungroup this, it's going to apply that top group to everything beneath, and we can see that they all have kind of cut off the right hand side here with that feather, so it has applied to each of these levels underneath. Another thing to note is that we could go in these individual layers and change the opacity, and now they're all at some lighter opacity, and if we ungroup, that's going to be fine. Everything's going to carry through just fine. However, Photoshop looks at things a little bit differently if the group itself has a change in opacity. So let's change this down to something else. And obviously we're seeing that it makes an impact here on the image, but we can't just remove these layers from the group. If the group has a change in the opacity or the fill, what will happen is the result will be different, and in some cases dramatically different. So if you try and ungroup this, you're going to get a warning, and Lumens is just telling you, hey, you can proceed, but the results may change significantly, so just take a look and see if you want to undo it. And so once we let this run through, we can compare before and after, and there's not really much impact here. But in other cases there really could be. So let's throw up some other options where there could be some differences. So I'm just gonna throw a couple of changes here. We're just gonna group this and change the opacity, and when we go to ungroup this, we get the warning, and we can see that the image actually did change there. So it just depends. In this case there was a pretty substantial change because we had this 57% applied. And just to illustrate this, what if we go and make the top be 100% and the component pieces inside be 57? So now if we ungroup this, we're not going to get a warning, and if we look before and after, there's no change. So that's just the way the Photoshop works if you have an opacity or fill adjustment on the group. So just to kind of recap things here, you can use the group feature to mask the mask and further refine your selections. And once you've got combination masks that you like, you can use the ungroup feature to collapse them to save on visual clutter and file space once you no longer need to modify the way that the different masks interact.